Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Let me just say that I love doing that. Dan, thank you very much. And good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Russ Mitchell, news anchor and managing editor of Channel 3, and welcome to a discussion on criminal justice reform. I am joined on stage by Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Mike O'Malley and Administrative and Presiding Judge for the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas, the Honorable John Russo. We'll have more on them in just a bit, but let's set things up. In recent years, we've witnessed an emerging groundswell of support for criminal justice reform and efforts to end mass incarceration in the U.S. There have been efforts at the federal level, including the introduction of bipartisan legislation aimed at providing aid to those who cannot afford bail. Then there are efforts of journalism. Notably, you may have heard about this, the creation of the Marshall Project, which seeks to create and sustain a sense of national urgency about the U.S. criminal justice system. And finally, there are philanthropic efforts, exemplified by art collector Agnes Gund and her donation of $165 million from the sale of a rare painting to raise money for criminal justice reform. Arguably, there is no place where this reform is more crucial than in Ohio. And this stat surprised me. Our prison population has increased 15% since 2005, giving us the fourth largest prison population in the U.S. Across the state, and here in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, there are efforts underway in the courts to improve the system. Today's speakers, as you know, are both elected officials and here to offer their perspectives. Michael O'Malley was elected prosecutor of Cuyahoga County last November. He's an attorney and has served in a number of public service roles, including bailiff and probation officer for the city of Cleveland, a councilman for Ward 16, assistant county prosecutor, and city of Parma safety director. He is a native of Old Brooklyn, a graduate of Kent State University and Cleveland Marshall College of Law. Judge Don Russo, to my far left, was elected to a fourth consecutive term as the administrative judge of the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court last November. He's responsible for appointing committees, speaking on court policies, and presiding over the court's general division docket. Judge Russo is serving a one-year term as president of the National Association for Presiding Judges and Court Executive Officers and is leading an examination of bail reform in Cuyahoga County. He's a native of Lakewood. Judge Russo is a graduate of John Carroll University and also Cleveland Marshall College of Law. And if you ever have jury duty, like I did last week, Judge Russo gives quite the rousing presentation. So anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much. Looking forward to a great conversation. Let's begin with an easy question, okay? And Mr. O'Malley, I'll begin with you on this. In your mind, what is the biggest thing the Cuyahoga County criminal justice system gets right and the biggest thing that it gets wrong that needs fixing right away?
I think the best thing we're doing right now is working cooperatively to try to improve the criminal justice system between myself, Judge John Russo, Public Defender Mark Stanton, and our administrative staffs. We're really trying to, in detail, work towards improving programs to allow people into diversion programs, looking at how we can expand potentially drug court, just a myriad of issues that we're trying to work cooperatively together. So I think first and foremost, I think what we've gotten right is our ability to work together. What we need to work on a little bit harder, perhaps, I don't know that I can name an item because I think right now we're doing a good job. We've got a great job with our discovery module. We're getting discovery to criminal defense attorneys quick. We're letting them evaluate their clients' cases. I think we're really working together with the defense bar to try to improve it. Again, my goal as prosecutor is not to win, it's to seek correct justice, to seek justice on behalf of victims and behalf of defendants. It's basically to do what's right. And I think we're doing that every day down at the Justice Center. My staff has done a great job. And so really, I think it's just about improving the little aspects for the greater good.
Before I move on to Judge Russo and let you ask that, let me follow up just for a second, Mr. O'Malley. How urgent do these fixes need to be in your mind?
Well, I think that the sooner, with every issue, when you improve something, the sooner the better, but you have to do it in a way that's thoughtful and that's going to stand the test of time. So because these are issues that impact people's lives, you do want to have some urgency, but you need to do it right.
Judge Russo, the best thing the criminal justice system is doing in Cuyahoga County, and perhaps the worst thing, what needs to be fixed right away?
I think one of the things we've continued to do in Cuyahoga County is to work collaboratively. It hasn't always been apparent that there are other individuals and other organizations and stakeholders that are working as well. So when you stop and say the criminal justice system, it isn't just the prosecutor and public defender in the courts. When you think about the municipal courts and the movements being made by Judge Adrian and the suburban courts, you think about the county executive and some of the movements that Mr. Triazzi and his office is attempting to do, the public defender's office, the sheriff, the clerk of courts, all of us, including then the agencies that you see, Recovery Resources, the Adams Board. So I think we do a nice job in Cuyahoga County of continuing to be engaged, and what that looks like and has kind of transformed and moved, but it's never gone away. So that's the one thing I'd say. Even going back to, I would point to Bill Mason and Judge Richard McMonigle, when they began to see how does justice reform, what does it look like, and what should it look like in Cuyahoga County? It hasn't gone away. It's meandered, but it's there. So I say we do that really well in Cuyahoga County. Maybe the issue of two things. I use the term, Judge Donnelly and a number of us in the court, trial date certainty. And I think trial date certainty on a criminal case gives definition to when a case should be finished and where we should be with a case. And I think maybe what we've done bad, but we've continued to work at, so it's one of those, it's a negative, but we're working at it, is how is it efficient for those who are accused to work through our criminal justice system in a way that's transparent, trial date certainty, and that it moves efficiently and effectively with the Supreme Court guidelines. Some negatives in the past, but I think we've worked real hard in order to improve that.
I wonder, you both campaigned on reform and changing things in your respective positions. Once you got there and saw what was going on, did you run into landmines you didn't expect? How difficult is it going to be to change some of these things you're talking about? Judge Russo, we'll begin with you.
You know, when I took the bench, so this is my 13th year, there was a term, and never specifically for a judge, it was called robitis. You get the robe, and now you become the king or the queen. And so that little fiefdom of robitis, and this is my fiefdom. I run this docket. I run this court. Now, today, our bench is wonderful. The 33 judges, the collaboration that we have. So I would say that it took the mindset of how do you move to collaboration? On the bench now I'm talking about, just the 34 of us, so that there's efficiencies and things that we do collaboratively, and we do it with regularity. And I think that's important. I'm not saying it's 100% of 34 of us that do that, but it's the idea that we continue to speak about that. My goal as the administrative judge is to speak collectively as a voice for my bench. And I try to do that for the last 4 years. It's not that I have all 33 of them in agreement, but if I could be collectively speaking on behalf of my bench, that's what I want to be able to do.
Mr. O'Malley, we remember your election from in the primary, last March, in March of 2016, pretty contentious. You promised a lot of changes. You promised a lot of reform. Once you got in office, did you discover that things were a bit different than you expected?
Not really. There were some issues. I think any time a public official assumes a public office, as you indicate, there's going to be some landmines or some bumps in the road, but I think it's to be expected. I think, for instance, we had some issues down at juvenile court, but we've changed the processes down at the juvenile court to prevent issues from happening down there that happened previously. So I think working collaboratively, Judge Kristen Sweeney from the administrative judge of juvenile court has been extremely helpful in helping us correct some of the past deficiencies. So on the issue of road mines, we've overcome them. And I think just going forward, there's issues that I see. I know I've been working with Judge Russo. We're talking about expanding drug court eligibility to try to diversify the population in drug court. And it's issues like that perhaps, there's certain approvals that are required through the court. There's steps that need to be taken. But, I think when your partners in the criminal justice system see you as a partner and and working really together with the same common goals, that these things are accomplished. And I know there's many improvements that working with Judge Russo we're on the road to making.
Let me ask you this, Mr. O'Malley. In your office, what is considered a successful day? When you go in at the beginning of the day and you end, is the objective to get things done quickly? Is the objective to take a look back and step back and move things slowly? How would you describe it?
You know what? I give my prosecutors a simple marching orders. Always do what's right. And I can tell you, in my 7 months in office, I don't feel it very rewarding because there's oftentimes, as we know, we only have to click on cleveland.com or watch the 6 o'clock news. There's tragedies that occur daily in our community where people are going to be held to be accountable for their activities, and somebody's going to go to prison for a lengthy time. And that happens every day, and it's while you do your job and you know that's what you have to do, that's what I've been elected to do, and you bring some type of justice as much as you can to try to make a victim whole, there's an empty feeling within inside of you. I can tell you personally, my most gratifying day since I become county prosecutor was that there was an individual who was incarcerated for 23 years for a murder that on a Friday, the head of my appellate section, Kristen Sobieski, came to me and explained to me some facts regarding this particular case that in her mind led her to question the integrity of that conviction. And within minutes, when it was explained to me, we got on the phone with the opposing lawyers, and I said, we need to vacate this conviction. We need to make a motion to Judge Brian Corrigan. We did that, and within 4 days, that individual walked out of a common pleas courtroom, a free man. And while the case is still pending, we've had more tests done, but I think at some point in the near future, that case is going to be gone. But I can tell you, I never felt so rewarded than to let somebody actually, who I believe to be innocent, walk out of a courtroom a free man after being incarcerated for 23 years. So I can tell you, justice isn't always putting people in jail for a long time, that it doesn't really fill the need, but just doing what right and telling my prosecutors to do what right makes a good day.
Judge Russo, from your standpoint, what's a successful day?
10,000 steps by noon.
Let me be more specific, perhaps. In your line of work as presiding judge of the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas, what would you define as a successful day?
Yes. And you know that smile on the face.
I get it.
We have a mission statement: access to justice. So access to justice. So if the reality is, if I have a day where I'm not getting a phone call about a concern regarding access to justice, somebody who came in who's trying to find their case, or they understand there was a warrant for their arrest, but they've moved from an address and they can't get the warrant lifted. Judge, can you help with that? Someone who's saying that a conviction that was dismissed at a later date, they're interviewing for a job next week, we need an expungement, and the motion's sitting, how can we get that done? So when I have that opportunity for access to justice to come to me as the administrative judge, or any of our judges, that we have the opportunity to move that forward. Just in the same vein as the victim who says, I demand that this case go forward with the trial, and that I have the opportunity for whomever the accused is, have their day in court. It's on both sides. So that's a day where I think as judges, we leave and we say, I've done my job, I've had that access to justice, and I've done it in a fair, impartial way where I want to come back again tomorrow morning and do it again.
We've talked about some things kind of in a broad brush sort of way, but when it comes to how to get these things done, how is that being done? Take us behind the scenes. What are you doing now to make these changes? Judge?
Well, I will say that when Prosecutor O'Malley was running for office, after he was elected, I think we, within that first few days, went and had coffee and just had a nice opportunity to talk about having the ability to knock on each other's doors, to call each other's cell phones, to reach each other's top individuals who are running their office, to be able to have a conversation. That was very important for me. It wasn't always present in the past, and I asked the prosecutor if that could be something that we could do. And we have. And our staff, our deputy chiefs, our court administrators, our first assistants meet now. We may not always be in that meeting, but they meet now attempting to meet it once a month. What are the issues that we need to be dealing about? Is there anything out there in the public that is touching so that we can have that access? The ability for my court administrator to call his first assistant and have those conversations. Even to the point where Prosecutor O'Malley was on vacation this week and called from his vacation on a cell phone in order to have a meeting on a matter that was important for all of us. So that's been very important. I think it's a change that's been good, and it's good. We don't always agree. So that's, we don't always agree. But if there's that disagreement, it's behind closed doors, and then we'll work through that to see where we end up.
Do you agree most of the time, and how healthy would you describe that relationship, Mr. O'Malley?
It's great, but for the record, we did not coordinate outfits today.
I thought for sure he was going to wear a white shirt and a red tie.
But it is true. We have different roles within the criminal justice system, but it's about showing and demonstrating respect to the court, and they demonstrate respect for myself and my office and my employees. So it's very easy. Maybe it's from my time as a Cleveland City Councilman, where if you want to get something done, you have to work with others nicely, work with other branches, like in my case, working with Mayor White and Mayor Campbell, and then to get things done, and working with your council president. So maybe it's from my history in government that allows me to productively work with others. And I pledged it when I was campaigning for this office that I would have a productive working relationship with the court, and I think we've demonstrated that over the first 7 months.
There's some issues that came up in a previous forum, kind of a list of things. I'm going to name a couple of these. I'm going to do 2 or 3 of them. So give me a minute, if you will, on each one and tell me if you agree or disagree. One thing that came up in a previous forum: defendants who are low income and who pose little risk to the public are absolutely being preyed upon when they're jailed while waiting for their cases to be resolved. Agree or disagree?
Well, I think there needs to be improvements in the bail system, and Judge Ron Adrian's here today. He is and has been a leader in court reform for 3 decades. And so currently, the Cleveland Municipal Court has enlisted the help of the Arnold Foundation to improve the opportunity for individuals to get a reasonable bail. And so I do think currently we can do a better job, but both Judge Russo, who also has a look going at a review on the bond situation, as well as the municipal courts, are working towards improving that so individuals have their constitutional right to bail fairly applied.
I would say I would answer your question with a yes as well. But I think overall, not only a national trend, but that has now been focused here in Cuyahoga County and the city of Cleveland, that we continue to look at. So my answer would be yes. And how do we stop that? There are some that should be incarcerated with a bond that may be higher, and if they make the bond. But there are some who are incarcerated and sitting in our county jails and city jails, losing access to medical coverage, losing access to their family and to their jobs, and when those things aren't necessary. And I think we're doing a nice job here in Cuyahoga County and the city of Cleveland to change that.
Judge, this is for you. Another concern: judges need to be intentional about setting bail and not influenced by bondsmen or the media spotlight. This person who made this comment said she has seen judges set a $1 million bond for someone who poses no risk.
I would think that my comment would be, we have a great bond commissioner in our office. So we have a number of individuals, over 20 employees that work for Cuyahoga County in our court, that actually interview and look at risk assessment tools. The Arnold Foundation is a tool that's being used now and soon to be rolled out. As of Monday, I sat through a training session on that. That tool and how that plays with Cuyahoga County and whether that becomes part of the total tool we look at is something that we're going to look at as well. But the reality is we have a number of individuals who assess that bond and make a recommendation to the judge. So I would say I don't believe that a judge, the 34 of us, or any of the municipal court judges are setting a bond because of a TV camera or a news story or because I want to flex my muscle. There may have been a lack of education or a lack of information that we were looking at that may have caused that dollar amount to be higher, and we're beginning to educate ourselves. I'll point out Judge K.J. Montgomery, who who sits as a spokesperson for the suburban courts. I'm going to give them a plug too, because all the suburban courts, including our Cleveland Municipal Court, have been actively involved on what do we need to do to educate the judges in Cuyahoga County so that we can become more aware of the factors that we need to look at in setting a bond. So I would disagree that it's a camera in my face.
And I would say that, at least in my tenure, the story that you have just indicated, that $1 million bond for if somebody has $1 million bond, generally in Cuyahoga County, they've committed a homicide. So to say that there is a judge that set $1 million bond on somebody who's not a threat to the community is hard to believe.
Let's talk about the disconnect between members of the population, some members of the population, and the criminal justice system. I've got a Harvard University study here from a couple of years ago. Nearly half of American young adults lack confidence in the nation's justice system. When you break that down to people of color, African American youth had the deepest distrust of the criminal justice system, 79% of those expressing little or no trust in their local police or the system in general. Hispanic youth, 62%, same thing. White youth, 31%. So you see there's a big disconnect there. And the question people ask all the time, and I'll ask you too, as officers of the court, as major players here, is the system fair?
When there is a high number, I think you said the number was 69% or 70% of 70% of African Americans feel that the system is stacked against them, that tells me that there's a problem. When I ran for this office and I campaigned in communities throughout this county, it was clear to me that there was a lack of confidence in the criminal justice system. And we as a community need to acknowledge that, and we need to address it. And part of my platform when I ran is getting out into the community, working hand in hand with our community partners, getting people in the neighborhoods to know their county prosecutor firsthand so that they can pose questions to him, they can talk to him, and working towards getting a feeling of trust. Because I think through events, not just in this community, nationally, that there is the trust of the criminal justice system is probably at a historic low, not just in our community, I think nationally. And again, I think we have to acknowledge it. And if that's there's a problem where there's smoke, there oftentimes there's fire. And I think we as a community need to acknowledge that and work towards overcoming it.
Judge Russo, I think many of us in this room have had this discussion, especially of late here, with the Tamir Rice case, with the Michael Brillo case. The question increasingly becomes more heated. Is this system fair? How do you convince someone that it is fair? What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to use the term education. And the question is, how do we educate, and where does that start? It's a justice system. It's the best system. When you look around the world, it's a system that is fair. And how do you convey that? And how do you get that to the general public? I think as a public servant, it's important for me and my bench for us to speak about and educate. We use something called Court in the Classroom that we started 4 years ago, where we actually take the courtroom to the classroom for 8th graders. And you say, 8th graders, what are you doing? That's so young. Well, it's not. The prosecutor told me recently of a robbery of a 10-year-old. And before they were done robbing him, they said to the 10-year-old, hey, you better get a gun to protect yourself, right? So those are things that are not being said and need to filter down. How do we educate the youth so that the cycle turns, right? How do we there's got to be a line drawn to say, let's educate now so that as they get older, they're educated, and then we can continue to do that process. It's not an easy task, but I think as public servants, we owe it to the community to educate. And so that's, how do we do that? It's for my court, I'm trying to do that in public speaking and opportunities for our judges to be out in the public, to do court in the classrooms, to do educational pieces so that we can educate. How do we do it as a community is a much larger question that we should address.
Well, these numbers obviously are startling. I mean, is it fixable from in a realistic standpoint? 71% of African American youth don't trust police or the criminal justice system. I mean, how do you fix that? You talked about some programs that are going on, but when you get face to face with folks, how do you fix that? Change those numbers?
I can only say one day at a time. One day at a time, you get out there, you're in schools, you're out in the community, you're talking to community groups, but this is not something that's going to be fixed overnight. It's continually coming to work every day, rolling up your sleeve and doing what's right. And that's what we're trying to do here in Cuyahoga County. That's the order I've given to my assistant county prosecutors. But Russ, you're absolutely correct. This is not something that is going to be fixed overnight.
Your predecessor, Mr. O'Malley, was accused of not handling the Tamir Rice case in the right way. I'm not asking you about what he did. I'm asking you in your office, when you looked at how that was handled, were there things that you saw that you said, I need to do things slightly differently?
Well, first and foremost, I've enacted a policy which was part of my campaign pledge that I thought there inherently was a conflict for a local county prosecutor's office to be handling cases from within their county with the same law enforcement officers that they work with on a daily basis. So part of my campaign pledge was that I believed we needed an independent investigation on every police use of force case that resulted in a homicide. An independent investigative agency needed to come out and evaluate that situation, do a report, and present it. But also we needed an independent prosecutor. So on all cases of police lethal use of force that have come down in this county since I've been county prosecutor, I believe there have been 2, we have an understanding with the Attorney General's office where they will come in and independently handle those investigations. So I think when we look back at what has happened in the past, I think the first and foremost the problem was, should my predecessor have been handling those cases to begin with? And first and foremost, to do it differently, that's what I would have done. I would have brought in an independent agency because I believe the community lacked any type of confidence that my predecessor was impartial in that manner.
I know you've both met with the Greater Cleveland congregations, had some great discussions with them. Judge Russo, what's the biggest lesson you think you've learned coming out of those conversations and just what you've seen over the last couple of years?
With some of the issues in Cuyahoga County and having the GCC available to be part of a sounding board, they bring that organization as well as others. I mean, they're not the only ones in Cuyahoga County, but using the GCC, for example, it gave us an opportunity to be able to hear from a large base concerns. And then the question is, how do you take some of those concerns to move forward? And I'll just use one for example. We're dealing with mental health. What is the largest hospital in the state of Ohio? And the answer is the institution, right? We house more of those individuals who need medical care. And so when conversations began to be discussed about how do we deal with the mental health, our specialty courts, we have 5 judges who deal with the mental health. But the real question is, how do you stop someone who has a mental health issue, maybe medicine that isn't being taken, and it then flares into what may be a criminal activity, or maybe it doesn't even rise to that level. But what can we do with that person? We bring them to the county jail. That's the only place we have. So we're looking at, and with the help of the GCC bringing that issue forth, is how about a place to drop off, not charge, not criminalize those issues with mental health, and have a wraparound service where there's recovery resources or mental health that Adams boards up so that we can help with others. So I think in saying GCC, I say it's a good sounding board. It's a good opportunity to speak to a wide range of individuals in Cuyahoga County. East side, west side, south, north. Everybody.
I've got about 30 seconds before we go to audience questions, but if you would just take one sentence and answer this before we do that. Please finish this sentence. The state of the criminal justice system in Cuyahoga County is, Mr. O'Malley?
The state of the criminal justice system in Cuyahoga County is working to improve itself.
Judge Russo?
I was going to say it's a fair system that's working to improve itself.
Okay. I think we're going to have some audience questions in just a minute. But it is time now for the mid-forum announcements. To those of you at home and here in the room, of course, today we're enjoying a Friday forum discussion on criminal justice reform efforts in Cuyahoga County with Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Michael O'Malley and the Honorable John J. Russo, presiding and administrative judge in the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. We're about to begin the audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, those of you who are joining us on our radio, broadcast, or webcast. If you would like to tweet a question, please tweet it to @TheCityClub, and our staff will try to work it into the program. We want to remind you that your question should be brief and to the point. Holding the microphones today, our Membership and Customer Experience Manager, Corey Isler. Corey, where are you? Hi, Corey. And Youth Forum Council Chair, Tiolu Orsanya. Tiolu, did I say that right? Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's go ahead and get to the first question. Before we do that, though, I want to say I was remiss earlier. I want to welcome to the attorneys and the judges who are attending today. Thank you so much for coming and making this such a wonderful conversation, adding to it. Okay, first question.
It's impressive as a lawyer to listen to how well I think we're being served case by case. Your responsibilities are exactly to deal with the issues that confront you as criminal justice cases. But there is, as your comments touch on, a larger societal issue of how we're encountering criminal behavior in our society. Who do you feel is your best partner institutionally in looking at the macro picture? If your responsibility is micro, who best helps you deal with the macro of criminal behavior?
Well, for the court, I would say it would be those services that are provided outside of the court for individuals that come through our justice system. Those mental health services, those addiction services, the opportunity to educate, to help with education, job training. Those are our biggest partners. And there was a statistic used that said the number of incarcerations in the state of Ohio, and we're fourth now in the country. You should know in Cuyahoga County, 8 years ago, we sent about 25% of our criminal defendants to the institution. We now send just under 13%. We're one of the lowest in the state of Ohio as far as a county. The largest county, but now one of the lowest numbers that are sent to the institution. And I only say that because of that's why I think our biggest partners is we're starting to look at evidence base. How do we rehabilitate? How do we put someone back in the community to be more effective and a citizen who is participating in the community? It's with those services, recovery resources, addiction services, the Adams Board, who are helping us do that.
Mr. O'Malley, you have a response to that?
Certainly. The Cuyahoga County prosecutors, we have a working agreement with Case Western where we analyze issues from, for instance, one of our task force. But also, I have frequent conversations with the public defender. I have frequent conversations with the court. I have frequent conversations with community groups. So when I look towards improvement, I try to get in dialogue with as many individuals and institutions and community groups as I can, because I don't think any one group specializes in any one area. And so to me, it's important to get divergent views, to try to come to some type of appropriate decision on my behalf when we try to look towards improving the system. But I think it's critical that we get many different viewpoints.
Let's go to our next question. Teola?
Mr. O'Malley, earlier someone mentioned sense of urgency, and in the case of Evan King, who spent 23 years in prison, and Ruel Saylor, who's been in prison for 14 years, when it comes to timeline and a sense of urgency, when your conviction integrity unit comes to the determination that they feel as though somebody may be innocent or has a claim of innocence and they've been in prison for a number of years, do you think that once you've met that conclusion, there should be a specific timeline before you approve or deny their application with your conviction integrity unit?
Well, you brought up the Ruel Saylor case, and that's one specific case, and I don't want to get too deep into details, but what I've learned is that there's some cases that, and in particular that case, where there's a potential somebody may be innocent of a charge that they've been convicted of, but you don't really know. And in that particular case, there was some inconsistent testimony he made himself in the particular case that kind of makes the issue more confusing, because he testified to certain issues in court under oath. And so some issues I think are more difficult. And when you're dealing with individuals who are convicted of, in that case, of a homicide, it's very difficult, because you want to do what's right for both the victim and the individual who may be wrongfully incarcerated. So in some areas, in some issues, it's very difficult, because to me, the Evan King issue was fairly simple. We had another case several months ago where an individual was convicted right before I took office, and we actually sent these photos to NASA to try to get a better analysis of the actual photos of the robbery suspect. And the conclusion after we had NASA blow it up, which was after the trial, was that that's not the guy. And so in that particular case, it was easy because we had enough people looking at it and we all came to agreement that's not the guy. That case is much more difficult. So I would love to say that in every case, it's simple to say we're going to come to a conclusion within 30 days and then we're going to do exactly what's right. But in some, you'd have to be Midas. And I don't, some cases are much more simpler to say. So to say in a particular case, every case is going to be 30 days, you just can't do it because you have to balance right and wrong and the victim with the potentially wrongfully incarcerated suspect. And when you do something of that magnitude, you have to make sure you get it right. And in that particular case, we're re-interviewing potential witnesses. We're trying to get more information on the case from independent third parties. But that case was made more complex by the individual's own testimony in court. And I think that's it.
Well, following up just for a second, if I could follow that up for a second, and the spirit of her question as well. When you come to that conclusion, it's a slam dunk that somebody has been wrongfully jailed, does that case become a priority for your office, or does the system allow that?
Well, when a case comes to me and my staff that somebody has been wrongfully incarcerated, the marching orders, and Russ Ty is here, he's head of my conviction integrity unit, the orders to bring it to me immediately. Literally, Evan King was brought to me on a Friday and he was a free man, I think, on a Wednesday. It's with that urgency to me because every day we deprive of an individual who's wrongfully convicted, every day that we deprive him of a day, to me, is a terrible, terrible thing. It's a terrible wrong. There's nothing you can do to a human being more. There's nothing that could be worse than to deprive somebody of his freedom wrongfully. So to me, it's always of an urgent nature, but we've got to make sure we get it right. And literally, Evan King was days, not even a week.
Corey, you have a question for us back there?
I'm concerned about prevention. Our record is terrible. Are the schools doing a good enough job on teaching parenting? That's number one. Are the churches and synagogues doing enough jobs about teaching parenting? What are we doing about gangs, this epidemic of gangs? What are we doing about that? And what are we doing about teaching about opioids? Our record is so bad. There must be a lot of things in prevention we're not doing. Do you have any thoughts?
Which one of you gentlemen would like to tackle that one?
I would, just to answer that question, I agree with you. I agree that as I said, we have to get to the core and start to change here so that it becomes consistent throughout. But how do we do that? How do we get, sometimes you see one agency out on the forefront, and then rather than bringing and collaborating with all the other agencies to do that. There was some idea, do we take all our mental health services and put it under one roof? Do we take all the nonprofits and so there are discussions about that, ideas about that. I know that since I've been the administrative judge, it's been a big discussion. And it's a tough question to answer because I wish we could say, as of next week, the initiative is for Cuyahoga County to do this with the schools, with the churches, with the parents, but it needs to be done. So I echo and say, yes, I agree with you, and it's a large task.
Mr. Malley?
I can only see that in this community, we have an epidemic with youngsters and guns. And young adults, I can give you some examples. We have a 14-year-old in this community who did 28 aggravated robberies with a weapon in a 30-day period. Everything from robbing a Dollar General to carjacking a mom and her 3 kids at a Wendy's at 30th and Carnegie. It's every day. I've got 2 14-year-olds and a 17-year-old who did 10 carjackings and immediately went to banks and robbed banks. And 20 years ago, I don't think we'd see 14-year-olds doing bank robberies. I don't think we'd see 14-year-olds doing 28 aggravated robberies. So I think this community has a problem that we need to acknowledge and we need to address. And for the sake of those kids, it's critical that we intervene early so they don't have the opportunity to do 28, because when you do 28, pretty much the hands of the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor are tied. And so it's critical we get there early, and it's critical at the juvenile court that we intervene in a way that puts them on a productive path. Because if we don't do it at that age and we don't get them going in the right direction at an age, it's inevitable that when they turn 18, they're going to be into the adult system. So do I think we have issues where kids are not giving the appropriate direction at home? Absolutely, and I think we as a community need to acknowledge it, and we need, whether it's the community groups, the churches, we need to intervene in such a way that we can get those individuals on a productive path. But it is absolutely a crisis in our community, and one only needs to look at the homicides, the robberies, and everything that's going on. And I can tell you this, 80% of the time it's going to be somebody between the ages of 14 and 20 who are doing it.
Tiolu. Hi.
Hi, thanks. I want to first say thank you for the dialogue. It's a great discussion, and you've raised so many issues that really need to be addressed in the community. The one I wanted to address most it only got a very short attention, and that's mental health. Regardless of how benign you want to be, there are mental health challenges that should never be a part of a prosecution or a trial. There, health insurance doesn't really cover mental health in the way that's useful for the community. So I appreciate that you're probably getting the worst challenges thrown on you. But is there a better way of dealing with mental health that totally skirts the enforcement process and puts them right into treatment, which is where they belong all the time? It may just be a family or a person who believes that they somehow don't need medication, or they can't afford medication, or something along those lines. But it doesn't start with a criminal state of mind.
Mr. O'Malley, you want to start with that one?
Well, I think this is where we have to, at least in my opinion, I have to give some credit to the GCC. They during the course of my campaign, I was having regular meetings with the GCC to talk about a variety of issues. But one of the issues that they had brought to me was the lack of mental health crisis centers within our community, where we could divert people out of the criminal justice system and into a mental health clinic. So it was very critical that the GCC has been pushing that agenda. Now, the Common Pleas Court, through Judge Holly Gallagher, has also been looking at the issue, and they have been meeting with myself and representatives from my office, as well as Judge Russo and Judge Gallagher. And I think that we are all of the belief that we need to look towards diverting individuals suffering mental health crises to a facility outside of county jail, where we can get them the appropriate treatment, and just, again, it's much more cost effective to help people and keep them out of the criminal justice system than it is to stack them like cordwood in county jail. And that's the goal. I know Judge Russo shares it, certainly I share it, my office shares it, and we're working with the GCC to try to get that implemented.
Look, Russ mentioned what happens behind the doors sometimes with the prosecutor. So if I can, I'll take you behind the doors. So for just a minute, so you understand what we're doing. So that's a great question, and some of it's been behind the door, but I'll talk about that right now. First of all, we have a court that has 5 judges who dedicate their docket to mental health. Now, mental health is certified by our Chief Justice in the Supreme Court. What I mean by that is they give their stamp of approval on you being a mental health court and you follow certain protocols. We go one step above that. So we are not certified, but I'm okay saying we're not certified because we deal with the mental health and the mentally disabled, right? Developmentally disabled. So someone whose IQ is low. So we go a step further in Cuyahoga County, not just mental health, but also developmental disabled. 5 judges, dockets that deal with all the mental health issues. So what's going behind the scene to answer your question? It's a 3-prong approach. The first approach is, how do you deal with the police and educating the police? And that's something that's going through with the currently now that's been mandated by the federal court. How do we train our police to know this person is having maybe an issue with their drugs, or they're having drugs available? What do we do with that person? Do we bring them to Prosecutor O'Malley in the jail, or do we bring them to a drop-off location? The second is wraparound services. When you drop them at the location, you can't just drop them and say, okay, we didn't arrest them, and we're going to let them have a bed for the night, and tomorrow we're going to push them out the back door, right? Because that doesn't help. The wraparound service, Judge Holly Gallagher is working now with Bob Triazzi and the Adams Board in how do we have the drop-off location with services to make sure they're getting their medication, making sure they're meeting their appointments, making sure they're seeing their doctor before we're putting them back in the community. And that's the way we're diverting the mental health from the institution that's where we always put them, right? You picked them up, you didn't have anything to do, you can't drop everybody off at the Veterans Hospital or charity, and you took them to jail and you charge them with a crime. So behind the scene, next week, we're starting something called sequential mapping, and we're beginning to look at, we've hired an outside agency to help us, 2 agencies, one from Chicago, one from Florida, and we have a model from Florida that we're using in Broward County that they use, and we're going to start to look at Cuyahoga County and look at how do we start the wraparound services for those who have mental health to divert them from the institution.
Thank you. Corey.
I appreciate that both panelists today spoke about bail reform. And I'm wondering, in the ongoing national discussion around bail reform, a lot of attention has been paid to data-driven risk assessment tools, such as the one developed by the Arnold Foundation that you both spoke about. And my concern is that in turning to such an approach, we neglect both the highly individual circumstances of those who encounter the justice system, as well as the systemic factors that lead them there. The Arnold Foundation assessment claims to be both race and gender blind because it doesn't ask about race or gender. But we know that many groups have disproportionate contact with the criminal justice system due to poverty, racism, and other systemic injustices. I'm wondering what role you see these algorithmic tools playing in bail reform, and whether or not you have any concerns that in turning to so-called data-driven solutions, that we run the risk of continuing to disenfranchise the people that we're seeking to unburden.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, so a great question, and maybe initially, if you saw John Russo in the newspaper against bail reform, you would pause for that reason, because I've never been against bail reform. It's always been about just one way of looking at setting bail. And I think it's important that the Arnold Foundation is one tool that could be used. But we use many others. That personal interview, the ability to meet the individual and have a chance to see where are they working, where do they live, can we verify that for them? And then go the next step to mental health issues, drug addictions, to see what other avenues we can explore before we set a bond, before we set requirements for that bond. If it's a personal bond, what else are we going to have them do? It's called court supervised release or pretrial services. That's a department that would continue to monitor the individual who's out on a bond, a personal bond, and has these issues, addictions or mental health or education, where we can continue to work with them while that case is being taken through the justice system. And so that's what we're doing. I would agree with you that one foundation, the Arnold Foundation, is probably, and I asked this question at the meeting on Monday, are there any jurisdictions in the United States who are just using this tool? And the answer was no, Judge. Depending on where you're at, they're throwing services around it to make sure that it's not just a one-system approach on setting a bail or bond.
So tools but not Bibles is what you're saying.
That is correct.
Okay.
But it's useful for the reasons noted, but there's also other matters that need to be looked at in order to stop the disparity as noted.
Okay. Teola, you have a question? Yes. Hi.
Yes, good afternoon. What I wanted to say is poverty and complicity to poverty is the biggest act of violence in our community. With that understood, it's hard to imagine support for efforts to reform if not for who the opioid epidemic is currently affecting. So we wish to inform you that in spite of the reform efforts of both you, Prosecutor O'Malley, and Judge Russo, kids are being left behind. If they are in fact addressed, then you would have less to worry about in the future. So we encourage more access to deferment programs with conflict resolution classes, personal interactions with victims in order for them to see the impact. But also, I just want to say that lawyers set precedents. So when they are brave enough and driven enough, you can really affect change. You are the most powerful lawyer and politician in Cuyahoga County, and your judge or your judicial recommendations, Mr. Russo, that you give other judges influence the fates of many. So why not implement programs to save our youth instead of throwing them away? Investigate our school system and prosecute incompetence in our failure of child protective services. And if you need help with that, we're here to help you.
I would like to just say that certainly we would be blind not to acknowledge that a great deal of the unfortunate, quite frankly, the horrific dilemma that is faced in our city and many other urban communities is the lack of opportunity for young kids. And one only needs to drive throughout the city of Cleveland and areas of some of the inner ring suburbs where there's just a complete lack of opportunity. Young kids need the ability to get out, find meaningful employment so that they can just lead a productive life. And in many areas of our city, there is just no opportunity for kids. And so, as a county prosecutor, I have little ability to sway, the national economic situations that are faced within our communities, but I think it's critical that we all acknowledge that there is a lack of opportunity for kids within our city, and I think at least partially what is to blame for much of the crime we see is just a lack of opportunity.
Corey, you have a question? There you are.
In what appears to be an overzealous appetite for indictment, we have faced the historical problem of overcharging and the piling on of charges that results in plea bargaining. That for many of us is a serious problem in our county. So I would like to know, well, what new policies or practices are in place to sort of halt that?
Certainly. When I came into office, I made it clear to my grand jury staff that they need to charge cases fairly and with the eye not to charge in such a way that you force people into plea agreements. The charge should be equate to the actions. And I think in the past we've seen situations where perhaps, for instance, the common charge was there would be a kidnapping charge tossed onto, which is an F1, tossed onto a domestic situation or things like that, where you're forcing individuals, because they're facing an F1, into a plea. My marching orders to my grand jury staff is to do what's right. Don't overcharge in a way that leads people to plea. And they have been responding to that, and I think what we're saying is we're also pushing for expanding the first appearance docket, which is a docket that is in the court where we are sitting down with defense attorneys and defendants prior to the charging stage so that we actually agree on a specific set of charges, and that's done by information prior to any grand jury process. So as we look towards expanding the first appearance docket, what you will see is the county prosecutor's office sitting down with defense attorneys and coming up with an agreed set of charges, which will certainly eliminate the possibility of overcharging.
I would just add, so when you start to look at the technical term, information, indictment, the difference is information, the lawyers and the prosecutors have had a chance to look at the facts of the case and say, if you're going to charge my client, these are the charges that we believe fit the factual basis. There's this dialogue, as the prosecutor said, and we've been able to do that with this first appearance docket where we give, before it's even sent to the grand jury, and then those charges. So I think you'll start to see there's more informations than indictments because the lawyers are now having this dialogue. So the difference is information means there's dialogue. Indictment means it went to the grand jury, and those grand jurors made the determination. As the prosecutor said, he's given some marching order to those who oversee the grand jury. So I think we could start to track that and be able to see how many informations are coming versus, and the prosecutor's been very, his staff continue to move me to move that first appearance docket, make it a larger docket, and start making it work a little more. And we're working to try to do that within the rules of the Supreme Court too, but we're working.
Yeah, and you will see, we're also sitting down with the public defender who handles a large percentage of the cases so that we all agree on a system that's going to be fair, More individuals are going to go by information, and you will see in Cuyahoga County over the next several years, I believe you'll see an increase in the amount of individuals who go by information, where, as Judge Russo has indicated, which means is that they agree to the charges going in.
We've got to wrap it up now. Again, one sentence. What can the public do to help make the system better? Again, I don't have a lot of time. They're going to give me the hook. One sentence.
I would say the public can become involved, whether it's through coming to meetings where the prosecutor or Judge Russo is attending, just becoming involved. And I think scrutiny on any system, whether it's the local government down at City Hall or the court system, is good. We are responsible to the public, and I think just become involved, and I think it'll help improve the system.
Judge Russo, quickly.
Education. So I'm going to go to that gentleman over there and say, maybe we need to bring Eric Gordon and say, hey, Eric, how about a class in 4th or 5th grade that is a mandatory class for all students in Cleveland, be the cutting edge that talks about how the criminal justice system affects you down the road if, in fact, you find yourself in that system. So I think as a public, we need to educate all of us and continue to do that so those 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds that are the future of Cuyahoga County are being educated by all of us.
To wrap things up, today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday forum discussion on criminal justice reform efforts in Cuyahoga County with Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Michael O'Malley and the Honorable John J. Russo, Presiding and Administrative Judge in the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. Today's forum is the Lozak Law Enforcement Forum, made possible by a generous gift from the Catherine L. and Edward A. Lozak Foundation. And that brings you to an end, us to an end of today's forum. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.